My daughter asked, "Why does Mommy's friend sleep in your bed when you're working?" The asphalt had been my companion for 18 straight hours, stretching from Birmingham to Memphis and back again. My rig hummed beneath me like a familiar prayer, carrying freight and dreams across state lines while I counted miles until I could hold my family again. At 34, I'd learned that the road was honest. It never lied about distance, never promised more than it could deliver, never pretended to be something it wasn't. When I pulled into our driveway that Friday evening, the porch light glowed like a beacon calling me home. 5-year-old Riley burst through the screen door before I'd even killed the engine, her small legs carrying her faster than seemed possible for someone barely tall enough to reach the truck's running board. "Daddy! Daddy's home!" she squealed, launching herself into my arms with the kind of trust that only children possess. I caught her mid-flight, spinning her around until she giggled so hard she could barely breathe. "Hey there, baby girl," I said, pressing my face into her hair that smelled like strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. "Did you miss your old man?" She pulled back to look at me with those serious brown eyes that reminded me so much of my mother. "Daddy, I have a question." "Shoot." "Why does Mommy's friend sleep in your bed when you're working?" The words hit me like a 16-wheeler running a red light. Time seemed to slow as I processed what she'd said, my mind scrambling to find an innocent explanation for my daughter's innocent question. Riley continued chattering about her week, completely unaware that she'd just detonated something inside my chest. "My name is Deshaun, and this is my story. But before we continue, don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment with the city you're watching from." I carried Riley inside while my thoughts raced. Lena was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove with her back to us. She turned when she heard our voices, and I studied her face for any sign of guilt or panic. Instead, she smiled the same smile she'd been giving me for 7 years of marriage. "Welcome home, baby," she said, rising on her toes to kiss my cheek. Her lips felt different somehow, cooler, more distant than I remembered. I set Riley down and watched her skip toward her room, humming a song I didn't recognize. Through the doorway, I could see toys scattered across her floor and drawings taped to her walls. Normal. Everything looked exactly as it should in a happy home. But something had shifted. Riley's question echoed in my mind, and I found myself noticing details I'd previously overlooked. The way Lena avoided my eyes when she asked about my trip, the slight tension in her shoulders, the fact that she was cooking dinner at 7 when she usually ate with Riley around 5:30. "How was your week?" I asked, settling onto a kitchen stool. "Oh, you know how it is. Same routine. Riley had a play date with the Johnson girl, and I caught up on some housework. Nothing exciting." The answer felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced it. I nodded and made appropriate noises about being tired from the road, but my mind was already working differently. Something in my daughter's innocent question had awakened an instinct I'd been ignoring, the part of me that had learned to read people's intentions during my years growing up in East Birmingham. After dinner, I helped Riley with her bath and read her 3 bedtime stories, savoring her sleepy giggles and the way she insisted on one more hug before I turned off her light. Then I joined Lena in our bedroom, where she was already under the covers, scrolling through her phone. "Long day," she said without looking up. "I'm exhausted." I nodded and headed for the shower, but as I passed our dresser, I noticed something that made me pause. A coffee mug I didn't recognize sat on Lena's nightstand, a blue ceramic cup with a chip on the handle. In 7 years of marriage, I'd never seen that mug before. Standing under the hot water, I made my first decision. I wasn't going to confront Lena directly. I wasn't going to demand explanations or start a fight based on a 5-year-old's observation. Instead, I was going to do what I'd learned to do on the road when something felt wrong with my rig: pay attention, gather information, and make smart decisions based on facts rather than feelings. Riley's question had opened a door I couldn't close. Now I needed to see what was on the other side. Saturday morning brought the kind of domestic routine that had once felt like peace but now carried an undercurrent of performance. Lena made pancakes while humming softly, her movements around the kitchen graceful and familiar. She wore the yellow sundress I'd bought her for her birthday, and her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. "Sleep well?" she asked, sliding a plate across the counter toward me. "Like a rock," I lied. I'd actually spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying Riley's question, and cataloging every detail of our bedroom that might tell a story I didn't want to hear. Riley appeared in her pajamas, dragging her stuffed elephant behind her. "Daddy, can we go to the park today?" "Of course, sweetheart, right after breakfast." I watched Lena's face as Riley climbed onto her booster seat. There was something different in her expression when she looked at our daughter, a flicker of anxiety that hadn't been there before. Or maybe I was just noticing it for the first time. "Actually," Lena said, refilling my coffee cup, "I was thinking we could have a quiet day at home, maybe work in the garden, let Riley play in the backyard." It was a reasonable suggestion, but it felt strategic. Like she wanted to control our environment, keep us contained where she could manage whatever narrative she was maintaining. After breakfast, I told Lena I needed to check something on the truck. Instead, I walked around our house slowly, seeing it through different eyes. The yard was well maintained, the driveway clear, everything exactly as I'd left it. But in the flower bed beneath our bedroom window, I noticed footprints in the soft soil. Size 11 or 12, definitely not mine. I knelt down and studied the impressions. They were recent, probably made within the last day or two. The prints led from the sidewalk to a position directly under our window, then back toward the neighbor's yard. "Find what you were looking for?" I turned to see Lena standing behind me, holding a glass of sweet tea. Her voice was casual, but her eyes were watchful. "Just checking the tire pressure," I said, standing and brushing dirt off my hands. Noticed some uneven wear on the front passenger side. She nodded and handed me the glass. "Riley's asking for you. She wants to show you something she drew." I followed her inside, but not before taking one more look at those footprints. Someone had been standing outside our bedroom window, looking in. The question was whether Lena knew about it, or whether she'd invited it. Riley's drawing was a masterpiece of 5-year-old artistry, stick figures labeled Mommy, Daddy, and Riley, standing in front of a house with a crooked chimney. But there was a fourth figure in the picture, standing slightly apart from our family unit. "Who's this?" I asked, pointing to the extra person. "That's Mommy's friend," Riley said matter-of-factly. "He comes over sometimes when you're driving." Lena moved quickly to look over my shoulder. "Oh, honey, that's just Mr. Williams from next door. Remember when he helped Mommy move the heavy boxes?" Riley looked confused. "But that's not—" "Riley, why don't you go wash your hands?" Lena interrupted gently. "Lunch will be ready soon." Our daughter skipped away, leaving me holding the drawing. The fourth figure was taller than the others, with dark hair and a broad smile. Not Mr. Williams, who was short and balding. Riley had drawn someone specific, someone she'd seen enough times to include in her picture of our family. I folded the drawing carefully and put it in my wallet, next to a photo of Riley on her first day of kindergarten. Evidence. I was building a case without even realizing it, gathering pieces of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. That afternoon, while Lena napped and Riley watched cartoons, I sat on our back porch and made my second decision. I was going to start paying attention to everything. Every change in routine, every new detail in our house, every shift in Lena's behavior. But I was going to do it quietly, without confrontation or drama. If my wife was living a double life, I needed to understand the scope of it before I decided what to do. And if I was wrong, if Riley's observations were innocent misunderstandings, then no harm would come from being more observant. But deep in my gut, where I kept the hard-earned wisdom of 34 years, I knew I wasn't wrong. Something was happening in my house while I was gone, and that blue coffee mug with the chipped handle was just the beginning of what I was going to discover. The road had taught me patience. Now I was going to use every lesson I'd learned. Sunday morning started with the ritual of departure preparation. I loaded my gear into the truck while Riley helped by handing me items from a safe distance. her small hands serious with the responsibility of assisting Daddy. Lena stood in the doorway wearing my old Alabama State t-shirt, looking like the woman I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago. "How long this time?" she asked, though she already knew my schedule better than most dispatchers. 4 days to Denver, then back through Nashville. Should be home Thursday evening." She nodded and walked over to kiss me goodbye. Her lips lingered a moment longer than usual, and I wondered if guilt was making her more affectionate, or if I was reading intentions that weren't there. I hugged Riley tight enough to make her giggle. "You be good for Mommy, okay?" "I will, Daddy. Will you bring me something from Colorado?" "Maybe a rock or a postcard. Something special." As I pulled out of the driveway, I watched our house shrink in my mirrors. Lena stood on the porch with her arms crossed, Riley waving enthusiastically beside her. A picture of domestic tranquility that I desperately wanted to believe was real. But 40 miles outside Birmingham, I realized I'd forgotten my electric shaver. I could buy a replacement, but I had time to double back without affecting my delivery schedule. More importantly, something inside me wanted to test the theory that was forming in my mind. I made a U-turn at the next truck stop and headed home. The house was quiet when I pulled into the driveway. Lena's car was there, and through the front window I could see the television playing cartoons, normal Sunday morning activities. I used my key to enter quietly, planning to grab my shaver and leave without disturbing anyone. But as I walked down the hallway toward our bedroom, I smelled something that stopped me cold. Cologne. Not mine. I used Old Spice, a scent as familiar to me as diesel fumes. This was something else, something expensive and musky that hung in the air like an uninvited presence. I found Lena in the bathroom, cleaning the mirror with unusual intensity. She jumped when she saw me, her hand flying to her chest. "Deshawn, you scared me to death. What are you doing here?" "Forgot my shaver," I said, studying her face. "Sorry if I startled you." She was breathing too fast, her cheeks flushed like she'd been running. The bathroom smelled strongly of the unfamiliar cologne, mixed with something else, shower steam, and the lingering scent of soap. I retrieved my shaver from the medicine cabinet, noticing that our towels were damp, even though I'd seen Lena fully dressed when I left an hour ago. On the counter sat a bottle of cologne I'd never seen before. Armani Code, expensive stuff that cost more than I spent on work boots. "This yours?" I asked, picking up the bottle. Lena glanced at it like she was seeing it for the first time. "Oh, that. I bought it for you. A surprise for when you got back. I was just testing how it smelled." The lie was smooth, practiced, but it didn't explain why she'd been cleaning the mirror so aggressively, or why the shower had obviously been used recently. I nodded and set the bottle back down, noting its position so I could tell if it moved. "That's sweet of you, baby. I'll try it when I get back." I kissed her forehead and headed back to my truck, my mind cataloging every detail of what I'd just witnessed. The cologne bottle was half empty, not new. The bathroom reeked of recent use by someone who wasn't my wife. And Lena's explanation made no sense. She knew I was loyal to Old Spice, had been teasing me about it for years. As I merged back onto I-65, I made my third decision. When I got to Denver, I was going to call a friend who worked in private security and ask about purchasing some surveillance equipment. Nothing fancy, just enough to satisfy my growing need to know what happened in my house when I wasn't there. The miles stretched ahead of me, but for the first time in my career, I wasn't thinking about the road. I was thinking about cologne bottles and damp towels and the way my wife's hands had shaken when she cleaned that mirror. Something was happening in my house, and I was going to find out what it was. But I was going to do it smart, quiet, and with enough evidence to protect myself and Riley when the truth finally came to light. The highway hummed beneath my wheels, carrying me toward answers I wasn't sure I wanted to find. Denver's skyline appeared through my windshield like a promise of clarity. After unloading my freight at a warehouse in Commerce City, I drove to an electronics store in downtown where my friend Marcus had recommended I shop. The clerk was a young tech enthusiast who lit up when I mentioned home security systems. Looking for something basic, I told him. Just want to keep an eye on things while I'm traveling for work. He showed me a wireless system with 4 cameras, each no bigger than a matchbox. They connected to my phone via an app that could send alerts when motion was detected. Professional grade, but simple enough for someone who spent more time with diesel engines than computer interfaces. These babies can record in low light, store footage in the cloud, and you can access everything remotely, he explained. Popular with truckers, actually. A lot of guys want to check on their families while they're on the road. I bought the system along with a few other items to make it look like a routine purchase. That evening, in my sleeper cab outside a truck stop, I studied the installation manual and watched YouTube tutorials until I understood every feature. The drive home gave me time to plan camera placement. I wanted coverage of the main areas without being obvious about surveillance. The living room, kitchen, and hallway leading to the bedrooms would tell me everything I needed to know about who visited my house and when. Thursday evening, I arrived home to the usual greeting, Riley running to meet me, Lena smiling from the doorway, dinner warming on the stove. Everything appeared normal, but I'd learned to look beyond appearances. "How was Denver?" Lena asked as we ate. "Cold. Snowed the whole time I was unloading." I watched her face as I spoke. "Picked up some security equipment while I was there. Figure it's time we had some cameras around the house." Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Cameras? Why?" "Neighborhood's changing. Mrs. Henderson mentioned seeing strangers walking around checking out houses. Just want to make sure you and Riley are safe when I'm gone." It was a plausible explanation, grounded in legitimate concern for my family's security. Lena nodded slowly, but I caught the flicker of anxiety in her eyes. "Where would you put them?" "Main living areas. Nothing in bedrooms or bathrooms, just common spaces where an intruder might enter or move through the house." That weekend, I installed the cameras with Riley's help. She thought it was fascinating, watching me mount the tiny devices in corners where they'd blend with smoke detectors and light fixtures. Lena stayed busy with household tasks, but I noticed her tracking my progress and asking casual questions about the camera's capabilities. "Can you watch them from your truck?" she asked, while I programmed the final unit. "Yeah, that's the point. App sends alerts to my phone when there's movement. Helps me feel connected to home while I'm working." Monday morning, I left for a 3-day run to Atlanta with a new awareness of what I was leaving behind. For the first time in months, I felt like I had some measure of control over the questions that had been haunting me. The first day brought normal footage, Lena and Riley going about their usual routines, morning cartoon time, afternoon playing in the backyard. I checked the feeds during my mandatory rest breaks, seeing nothing more suspicious than Riley dragging her stuffed animals from room to room. Tuesday showed similar patterns until late evening. Around 9 o'clock, after Riley's bedtime, motion sensors triggered in the kitchen. I switched to the live feed and watched Lena moving around, cleaning up from dinner. Normal activity. But then the front door opened, and a man entered my house like he belonged there. He was tall, well-built, with the kind of easy confidence that suggested familiarity with his surroundings. Lena greeted him with a hug that lasted too long, and they moved to the living room where the camera captured their conversation in perfect clarity. I sat in my truck outside an Atlanta warehouse, staring at my phone screen, watching my wife's double life unfold in real time. The man was someone I recognized, Jordan Matthews, a guy who lived 3 streets over and worked construction. He'd waved to me at neighborhood barbecues, made small talk about football and weather. Now he was sitting on my couch, drinking from my coffee mugs, acting like the man of my house. I saved the footage to multiple cloud storage accounts and continued watching. They talked for an hour, their body language intimate and comfortable. When Jordan finally left around 11, Lena walked him to the door with her hand on his arm. I turned off my phone and sat in the darkness of my cab, processing what I'd seen. The truth was worse than I'd imagined, but also clearer than I'd dared hope. Riley hadn't been confused or mistaken. She'd been trying to tell me exactly what was happening in my absence. Now I had proof. The question was what to do with it. Wednesday night brought rain to Atlanta and revelation to my world. I was parked at a rest stop near Macon, watching water streak across my windshield while the motion alert buzzed insistently on my phone. 9:15 p.m. Past Riley's bedtime, but early enough for adult activities. The camera feed loaded slowly, buffering in the weak cell signal, but what I saw made my hands tighten around the device. Jordan was back, this time carrying a bottle of wine and moving through my house with the casual familiarity of someone who'd been there many times before. Lena met him in the kitchen, wearing a dress I'd never seen, something silky and red that she definitely hadn't been wearing when I called to say goodnight to Riley an hour earlier. She'd changed clothes for him, prepared for his visit like it was a date. I watched them move to the living room, where they sat closer together than the furniture required. Jordan opened the wine while Lena dimmed the lights, and their conversation included touches and glances that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. The intimacy between them was obvious, but what struck me more was how comfortable they appeared. This wasn't a new affair driven by passion and uncertainty. This was an established relationship with its own patterns and rhythms. When Jordan pulled Lena closer and kissed her, I saved the footage and closed the app. I'd seen enough to confirm what Riley's innocent question had suggested, but not enough to torture myself with details I couldn't unknow. Instead, I opened my notes app and began documenting everything I'd observed. Times, dates, activities, conversations I could remember from recent weeks that now carried different meaning. I was building a case, though I wasn't sure yet what court would hear it. The rain drummed against my truck while I worked, creating a cocoon of white noise that helped me think clearly. Jordan had been in my house multiple times while I was working. He knew Riley well enough that she'd drawn him in her family picture. He was comfortable enough to let himself in and move around like he lived there. This wasn't a momentary mistake or a brief lapse in judgment. This was a long-term relationship that had been developing while I drove highways across 3 states, believing my wife was home being faithful and my daughter was safe with someone I trusted. The betrayal cut deep, but what bothered me more was the deception involved. Lena had been maintaining an elaborate performance every time I came home, switching between her roles as devoted wife and secret girlfriend, depending on my schedule. Riley was living in the middle of this lie, probably confused by the mixed signals and conflicting stories she was being told. That thought made my chest tighten with protective anger, not just for myself, but for my daughter who deserved better than being raised in an environment built on deception. I called my dispatcher and requested a route home for Thursday. I needed to see my family, but more importantly, I needed to start making decisions about how to handle what I'd discovered. The drive back to Birmingham gave me time to consider my options. I could confront Lena directly, demand explanations and apologies and promises to change. I could confront Jordan and handle this situation the way my father might have, with fists and threats and immediate consequences. But neither approach felt right. Direct confrontation would give Lena time to create new lies and Jordan incentive to disappear before I could gather more evidence. If this situation was going to end, I wanted it to end completely and permanently, with legal protection for Riley's future. By the time I reached the Alabama state line, I'd made my decision. I was going to continue gathering evidence while appearing oblivious to what was happening. I was going to document everything, the affairs, the lies, the financial implications of Lena's double life. And when I had enough proof to protect my daughter and myself, I was going to end this marriage in a way that left no doubt about who was the victim and who was responsible for destroying our family. The highway stretched ahead of me, carrying me toward a confrontation I was going to postpone until I held all the cards. Thursday evening brought me home to a perfectly orchestrated domestic scene. Lena had dinner ready, pot roast with potatoes and carrots, my favorite meal after long hauls. Riley had drawn me a new picture while I was gone, this one featuring my truck prominently in the center. The house smelled like home cooking and vanilla candles. "Welcome back, baby," Lena said, kissing me with lips that had kissed another man less than 24 hours earlier. "How was Atlanta?" "Same as always. Hot, busy, ready to be home." I hugged Riley, and listened to her chatter about kindergarten while studying Lena's performance. She was playing the role of devoted wife with Academy Award precision, asking about my trip, serving my favorite meal, wearing the perfume I'd given her for Christmas. If I hadn't seen the footage from Wednesday night, I would have believed every gesture was genuine. The realization of how long she'd been acting this part made me wonder what else about our marriage had been performance rather than reality. "Daddy, look what I made." Riley handed me a construction paper card with "Welcome Home" written in crayon. "This is beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you." Mommy helped me spell the words. I glanced at Lena, who smiled with what looked like maternal pride. "She wanted to surprise you. We worked on it this morning." The card was sweet, but I found myself analyzing its timing. Had Lena suggested the project to establish her presence at home this morning? Was this another prop in her elaborate performance? After dinner, I helped Riley with her bath while Lena cleaned the kitchen. Our evening routine felt familiar and comfortable, but I was hyper-aware of every interaction, looking for cracks in her facade. "Daddy," Riley said as I helped her into pajamas, "are you going to work again soon?" "Probably Monday or Tuesday. Why?" She was quiet for a moment, concentrating on buttoning her pajama top. "Mommy gets lonely when you're gone." "Does she?" "Yeah, that's why her friend comes over." "To keep her company." My hands stilled on her hairbrush. "What friend, baby?" "The tall one. He's nice. He brought me cookies once." Riley's innocent revelation hit me like cold water. Jordan hadn't just been sneaking around my house. He'd been interacting with my daughter, bringing her gifts, establishing a relationship with her while I was working. "What kind of cookies?" "Chocolate chip, store-bought, not like Mommy makes." Riley yawned and crawled into bed. "He said I couldn't tell you about them because it was a surprise for later." I tucked her in and kissed her forehead, my mind reeling. Jordan was coaching my 5-year-old daughter to keep secrets from me. He was actively participating in the deception, using her innocence to cover his tracks. That night I lay in bed beside Lena and watched her sleep. She looked peaceful, beautiful, like the woman I'd married 7 years ago. But I knew now that the person lying next to me was essentially a stranger who'd been playing a role in my life. The next morning, I made coffee and sat on the back porch, ostensibly reading the newspaper but actually planning my next moves. I needed more evidence, but I also needed to protect Riley from further manipulation. "You're up early," Lena said, joining me with her own cup. "Couldn't sleep, thinking about work stuff." "Anything wrong?" "Just wondering if I should consider taking local routes, be home more." Her reaction was subtle but telling, a slight tension in her shoulders, a pause before she responded. "That would be a big change. Wouldn't the pay be different?" "Some, but maybe being home more would be worth it." "Let's not make any big decisions right now," she said quickly. "Things are good the way they are." Of course she wanted to maintain the status quo. My current schedule gave her freedom to live her double life without interference. The idea of me being home more often threatened the carefully balanced deception she'd constructed. I nodded and went back to my newspaper, but I was mentally adding her reaction to my growing file of evidence. Lena wasn't just cheating, she was actively working to prevent changes that might expose her affair. That afternoon, while Lena ran errands and Riley napped, I reviewed more camera footage from the past week. The pattern was clear. Jordan visited regularly while I was gone, staying late into the evening, acting like he belonged in my house and my life. But what bothered me most was seeing him interact with Riley in the footage. He was gentle with her, patient when she showed him drawings or asked him to read stories. In another context, his behavior might have seemed admirable. Instead, it felt like theft. He was inserting himself into moments that should have belonged to me, creating memories with my daughter while I worked to provide for our family. I was going to stop him. But first, I was going to make sure that when this ended, justice was complete and permanent. Sunday afternoon found me at Lewis Auto Repair, a converted gas station where my mentor, Ezra Lewis, had been fixing engines and dispensing wisdom for 40 years. I'd known him since I was 16 and desperate for work. When he'd given me a job sweeping floors, and taught me that mechanical problems usually had logical solutions if you were patient enough to diagnose them properly. Now 72 and officially retired, Ezra still spent most days at the shop, drinking coffee and supervising his nephew's work. He looked up from a transmission he was examining when I walked in, grease-stained hands wiping on an equally stained rag. Deshaun Carter. Don't usually see you on Sundays unless something's wrong with that rig of yours. Truck's fine, Mr. Lewis. Mind if we talk? He studied my face with the same intensity he'd once used to diagnose engine troubles, then gestured toward two folding chairs in the corner where he held court during slower moments. What's on your mind, son? I'd rehearsed this conversation during the drive over, but sitting across from the man who'd taught me most of what I knew about life and machinery made the words come easier. Found out my wife's been seeing another man while I'm on the road. Ezra nodded like I'd just told him I needed new brake pads. You sure about that? Caught them on camera, multiple times. And what are you planning to do about it? That's what I came to ask you. Ezra was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands folded in his lap. He'd been married to the same woman for 51 years, raised 4 children, and buried 2 of them. If anyone understood the weight of family decisions, it was him. When I was your age, he said finally, I might have handled this with my fists. Confronted the man, demanded satisfaction, made a lot of noise about being wronged. But making noise don't fix the problem. Just alerts everyone to the fact that you got one. He leaned forward slightly. You got a little girl involved in this mess. Riley. She's 5. Then your first job ain't getting revenge. It's protecting her future. I nodded, understanding his logic but needing more specific guidance. How do I do that? Same way you'd fix a complex engine problem. Gather all the information first. Understand every component of what's broken. Then you fix it once, permanently, so it don't break down again later. Ezra's words echoed what I'd been thinking, but hearing them from someone whose judgment I trusted made my strategy feel less like vindictiveness and more like responsible problem-solving. The man who acts in silence, he continued, never loses the sound of victory. We talked for another hour about practical matters, legal representation, evidence gathering, financial protection. Ezra had been through enough family crises with his own children to understand the importance of documentation and preparation. One more thing, he said as I prepared to leave. When this is over, don't let the anger eat you alive. Your daughter's going to need a father who can move forward, not one who's stuck replaying past hurts. I drove home with Ezra's advice weighing in my mind. He was right about everything, especially the part about protecting Riley's future. Whatever decisions I made needed to serve her long-term interests, not just my immediate desire for justice. That evening, I played board games with Riley, while Lena cleaned house with unusual intensity. I found myself studying my daughter's face, looking for signs of confusion or distress from living in an environment built on lies. She seemed happy enough, chattering about school friends and upcoming field trips. But I noticed she was more clingy than usual, sitting closer to me during our game and asking several times if I was going to work again soon. Not for a few days, sweetheart. Daddy's going to be home for a while. Good. I like it when you're here. Her simple statement reinforced everything Ezra had told me. Riley needed stability and honesty, not the elaborate deception that Lena had been maintaining. Whatever choices I made moving forward, they needed to provide my daughter with a better environment than the one she was currently experiencing. After she went to bed, I sat in my truck in the driveway and called my insurance agent to update my beneficiary information. Then I called my bank to open a separate checking account. Small steps, but important ones for protecting Riley's future when this situation finally reached its conclusion. Ezra was right. The man who acts in silence never loses the sound of victory. And I was going to make sure that when my silence finally ended, the victory was complete and permanent. Monday morning brought an unexpected discovery that shifted everything I thought I knew about Lena's betrayal. While she showered and Riley watched cartoons, I checked our joint bank account online to verify my latest direct deposit. What I found made my coffee cup pause halfway to my lips. Our checking account showed a transfer I didn't recognize. $1,500 moved to an account I'd never seen before. The transaction was dated from last Wednesday, the same night I'd watched Jordan visit our house with wine and expectations. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to the bank's customer service portal, using Lena's social security number and maiden name to search for additional accounts. The system revealed something that made my hands clench. Lena had opened a joint checking account 2 months ago with Jordan Matthews as the co-holder. The account history told a story I wasn't prepared to read. Regular transfers from our household account, money that should have been going toward Riley's college fund, our mortgage, family expenses. Instead, it was funding a secret life that I'd been unknowingly subsidizing. I printed the bank statements and transaction records, my trucker's discipline keeping my movements calm, and despite the rage building in my chest. Lena wasn't just betraying our marriage. She was stealing money that I earned driving 18-hour days to provide for our family. The amounts weren't huge by themselves, but they added up. $300 here, $500 there, occasionally larger transfers that coincided with my longer hauls. Over 8 weeks, nearly $6,000 had moved from our family account to fund whatever life she was building with Jordan. "Everything okay out there?" Lena called from the bathroom. "Just checking the bank balance," I replied, my voice steady. "Direct deposit came through fine." "Good." I was worried about timing with the mortgage payment due. The casual lie made my jaw tighten. Our mortgage was automatically debited and never late, but Lena was creating fictional concerns to cover her real financial activities. After she left to drop Riley at school, I called the bank's fraud prevention line and spoke with a supervisor about unauthorized account access. What I learned was both encouraging and infuriating. "Mr. Carter, I see the joint account you're asking about. Since your wife is the primary account holder and used her own identification to add the co-holder, it's not technically fraud from our perspective. However, if marital assets are being transferred without your knowledge, that's a matter for family court." I thanked the supervisor and hung up, understanding that this financial betrayal would actually strengthen any legal case I might need to build. Lena had created a paper trail that demonstrated deliberate deception and misuse of household funds. That afternoon, I visited a different bank across town and opened my own checking account, transferring a significant portion of our savings to protect it from further unauthorized access. I also established a separate savings account specifically for Riley's future needs. The bank manager, a professional woman about Lena's age, was discreetly helpful when I explained that I was protecting assets during a potentially difficult divorce. "Mr. Carter, I'd recommend documenting all transfers and keeping records of how household funds have been used. Financial misconduct can significantly impact custody and alimony decisions." I left the bank with new account numbers and a clearer understanding of the financial dimension of Lena's betrayal. She wasn't just cheating emotionally, she was redirecting money that should have been securing Riley's future. That evening, Lena made dinner while humming softly, apparently oblivious to the fact that her secret account had been discovered. I watched her move around our kitchen, using pots and pans I'd bought, preparing food I'd paid for, all while funding a relationship that made a mockery of our marriage. "How was your day?" she asked, serving a plate that probably cost less than she'd transferred to Jordan's account last week. "Productive. Took care of some banking, made some calls about future routes." "Anything interesting?" "Just organizing our finances better, making sure everything's properly protected." The word "protected" made her glance up sharply, but I was already focused on cutting my steak, giving no indication that the protection was from her rather than for her. After dinner, I helped Riley with homework while monitoring my phone for camera alerts. The footage from recent days showed a pattern. Jordan typically visited on weekday evenings when Riley was asleep, staying until late and acting increasingly comfortable in my house. But now I understood that his comfort came at a literal cost. Every beer he drank, every meal they shared, every intimate evening was being funded by money I earned while he enjoyed what should have been mine. The financial records were going to be the foundation of my legal strategy, but they were also fuel for a deeper anger that I was working hard to control. Ezra had warned me about letting rage consume the rational planning that would serve Riley's future. I was going to channel that anger into preparation for the confrontation that was coming. And when it arrived, Lena was going to discover that her secret accounts had created the very evidence I needed to ensure she lost everything she'd been stealing. Tuesday morning found me in the downtown Birmingham office of Patricia Morgan, Esquire, a family law attorney whose reputation for handling complex custody cases had been recommended by 3 different truckers who'd been through difficult divorces. Her office occupied the 15th floor of a steel and glass building, with windows that offered a view of the highways I knew so well from ground level. Ms. Morgan was a small woman in her 50s with silver hair and intelligent gray eyes that seemed to catalog every detail as I explained my situation. I'd brought 3 folders of evidence, printed bank statements, screenshots from the security cameras, and detailed notes about Riley's revelations and behavioral changes. Mr. Carter, I appreciate how thoroughly you've documented this situation. Most clients come to me with emotional grievances, but little concrete evidence. She reviewed the financial records first, her expression growing more serious as she studied the unauthorized transfers and secret joint account. This level of financial deception significantly strengthens your position. Courts take very seriously the misuse of marital assets, especially when children's welfare is involved. Next, she examined the camera footage, watching silently as Jordan moved through my house with obvious familiarity. When she reached the clips showing him interacting with Riley, her professional composure sharpened. Your daughter is being exposed to this relationship without your knowledge or consent. That's a factor in determining her best interests going forward. We spent 2 hours discussing strategy, timeline, and potential outcomes. Ms. Morgan explained that Alabama favored shared custody arrangements, but the evidence I'd gathered could support a case for primary physical custody with me. The financial misconduct alone creates grounds for limiting her access to marital assets. Combined with the deception involving your daughter, we have a strong foundation for protecting both your parental rights and your financial security. She outlined a plan that was both comprehensive and strategic. First, we would file for divorce, citing adultery and financial misconduct. Simultaneously, we would request temporary custody arrangements that prioritized Riley's stability. Finally, we would seek an accounting of all marital assets and protection orders preventing further unauthorized transfers. How long will this take? I asked. Initial filings can be completed within days. Temporary orders typically take 2 to 3 weeks. The entire process could resolve in several months if your wife chooses cooperation over confrontation. Ms. Morgan's confidence was reassuring, but I sensed she understood the emotional complexity beneath the legal strategy. Mr. Carter, I need to ask about your goals beyond the legal requirements. Some clients want maximum punishment for their spouse's betrayal. Others prioritize moving forward with minimal conflict for their children's sake. I want Riley to be safe and secure. I want the lies to stop, and I want legal protection so this never happens again. Those are reasonable objectives that align well with what the evidence supports. That afternoon, I signed retainer agreements and provided Ms. Morgan with authorization to investigate further financial irregularities. She recommended hiring a private investigator to document Jordan's movements and establish a comprehensive timeline of the affair. The more evidence we have, the stronger your position becomes. Your wife will likely claim the relationship is recent or that the financial transfers were legitimate household expenses. I authorized the additional investigation, understanding that thorough preparation would serve Riley's long-term interests better than rushing into confrontation. Wednesday brought a phone call from Ms. Morgan's investigator, a former police detective named Williams, who specialized in matrimonial cases. He'd conducted preliminary surveillance of Jordan's residence and confirmed that he was unemployed despite claiming construction work. Mr. Carter, it appears your wife has been financially supporting Mr. Matthews for several weeks. The transfers to their joint account correlate with his rent payments and vehicle expenses. The information added another layer to the betrayal. Lena wasn't just cheating and lying, she was using my income to support her boyfriend's lifestyle while I worked cross-country routes to provide for our family. That evening, I maintained the appearance of normalcy while internally preparing for the confrontation that was now only days away. Riley seemed happier with me home consistently, and I found myself treasuring the domestic routines I'd taken for granted, reading bedtime stories, helping with homework, sharing meals at our kitchen table. Lena continued her performance as devoted wife, but I noticed increased anxiety in her behavior. She checked her phone more frequently, made excuses to leave the house for brief errands, and asked casual questions about my work schedule. "When do you think you'll go back out?" she asked Thursday evening. "Not sure yet. Enjoying being home with my girls." The answer clearly wasn't what she wanted to hear, but she smiled and nodded like a supportive wife would. I was going to miss that smile, even though I now knew it was built on lies. But Riley deserved better than living in an elaborate deception, and I deserved better than unknowingly funding my own betrayal. Ms. Morgan had prepared the paperwork. The investigator had gathered additional evidence. Everything was in place for the confrontation that would finally bring truth into our house. Riley's 6th birthday arrived with October sunshine and the kind of crisp air that made everything seem possible. I'd taken the week off from driving to focus on her celebration, and Lena had thrown herself into party planning with an enthusiasm that might have seemed touching if I didn't know about the double life she was maintaining. Our backyard was decorated with pink and purple streamers, matching Riley's favorite colors. We'd rented a bounce house and invited children from her kindergarten class, along with neighborhood families who'd become part of our extended community over the years. "Daddy, look how pretty everything is." Riley spun in her new dress, a frilly pink creation that made her look older than 6. "Beautiful, just like the birthday girl." I spent the morning setting up tables and chairs while Lena arranged food and decorations with military precision. Her phone buzzed constantly with what she claimed were coordination messages from other parents. But I noticed the way she positioned herself away from me when reading certain texts. The first guests arrived around noon, the Johnson family from across the street, followed by 3 families from Riley's class. Children ran shrieking toward the bounce house while adults clustered around the beverage table, making the kind of small talk that lubricates suburban social gatherings. "Deshaun, good to see you home for once," said Mike Henderson, who worked IT for a medical company. "Lena mentioned you might be transitioning to local routes." I glanced at my wife, who was arranging cupcakes with sudden intensity. "Still considering options. Family time's important." "Absolutely. Kids grow up fast." Around 1 o'clock, Jordan Matthews appeared at our back gate like he'd been invited. He carried a wrapped present and moved through our yard with the confidence of someone who belonged at my daughter's birthday party. "Sorry I'm late," he said to Lena, kissing her cheek in what could have passed for friendly greeting, but lasted a moment too long. Traffic was crazy. Riley ran over to hug him, clearly delighted by his presence. "Jordan, did you bring me a surprise?" "Maybe," he said, ruffling her hair with familiar affection. "But you have to wait until present time." I watched this interaction while maintaining a conversation with other parents, cataloging every detail of how comfortable Jordan was with my daughter and how naturally she responded to him. This wasn't a new relationship. He'd been building bonds with Riley while I'd been building my case against him. The party proceeded normally through cake and games, but I found myself studying the dynamic between Lena and Jordan when they thought no one was watching. Casual touches, shared glances, inside jokes that excluded everyone else at the gathering. They were acting like a couple hosting a party together, with me relegated to the role of helpful neighbor rather than husband and father. During present opening, Jordan's gift drew enthusiastic squeals from Riley, an expensive dollhouse that I recognized from toy store advertisements. The kind of elaborate purchase that would have required significant planning and financial investment. "Jordan, that's too much," Lena protested with mock concern. "She deserves something special," he replied, his eyes holding hers with obvious meaning. After the other guests left, Jordan lingered to help clean up. I found myself watching him move through my house with proprietary ease, putting dishes away in cabinets he shouldn't have known about, making jokes that referenced conversations I hadn't been part of. "Thanks for all your help," Lena said as Jordan prepared to leave. "The party was perfect. Wouldn't have missed it. Riley's a special kid." He hugged my daughter goodbye, promising to see her soon, then shook my hand with the kind of firm grip that might have been challenging if I hadn't known what I knew. That evening, after Riley was asleep, I found the receipt for Jordan's dollhouse gift in our kitchen trash. It had been purchased with a credit card linked to the secret joint account Lena had opened, meaning that Jordan's expensive gesture for my daughter had been funded with money I'd earned while he was sleeping in my bed. The symbolism was perfect and infuriating. He was using my income to buy my daughter's affection while having an affair with my wife in my house. But it was also exactly the kind of evidence Ms. Morgan had said would strengthen our case. The receipt showed financial misconduct with specific details that would be impossible for Lena to explain away in court. I photographed the receipt and added it to my evidence file, along with pictures from the party showing Jordan's obvious comfort in our home and his established relationship with Riley. Tomorrow, I was going to call Ms. Morgan and authorize her to file the divorce papers. Riley's birthday party had been the final performance in Lena's elaborate deception, and now it was time for the truth to take center stage. The man who acts in silence was finally ready to speak. And when he did, the sound would echo through both our lives forever. The following Monday brought unseasonable warmth to Birmingham and a phone call that changed the trajectory of everything I'd been planning. I was reviewing route options at the kitchen table when Lena's cell phone rang with the sharp urgency that suggested official business rather than social conversation. "Mrs. Carter, this is Amanda Fisher from Hartwell, Bradley and Associates. I have some documents that require your immediate attention. Will you be available this afternoon for service?" Even from across the room, I could hear the formal tone that meant legal papers. Lena's face went pale as she listened to instructions about accepting delivery and acknowledging receipt. "Yes, I'll be here," she said, her voice tight with controlled panic. I kept my eyes on my paperwork, but every sense was focused on her reaction. "Miss." Morgan had promised to move quickly once I authorized filing, but I hadn't expected the papers to be served quite this soon. "Everything okay?" I asked when she hung up. "Just some insurance paperwork. Nothing important." The lie came easily, but her hands were shaking as she set down the phone. For the first time since this began, Lena looked genuinely afraid, rather than merely cautious. I spent the morning running errands while she paced through the house with nervous energy, checking her appearance in mirrors and straightening furniture that didn't need straightening. When I returned with groceries around noon, a sedan was parked in our driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched a professional woman in a business suit hand Lena an envelope and clipboard. Even at a distance, I could see my wife's hands trembling as she signed acknowledgement of service. The process server left quickly, and Lena stood in our driveway for several minutes, staring at the envelope like it contained explosives rather than legal documents. When she finally came inside, her composed facade had completely cracked. She sat at our kitchen table and opened the envelope with the careful movements of someone disarming a bomb. The papers were comprehensive: petition for divorce citing adultery and financial misconduct, temporary custody orders requesting primary physical custody for me, and motions for asset protection and full financial disclosure. "Deshawn." Her voice was barely a whisper. "We need to talk." I looked up from unpacking groceries with carefully practiced confusion. "About what?" She held up the legal documents. "About these." "What are they?" "Divorce papers, custody petitions." "Financial investigations." Her voice cracked on the last words. "How did this happen?" I sat down across from her and read the papers with the expression of someone seeing them for the first time. Ms. Morgan had done exactly what we'd discussed: comprehensive legal action that left no doubt about the seriousness of the charges. "Lena, I don't understand. Why would someone file divorce papers against us?" The question forced her to confront the obvious answer, that I was the only person who could have initiated these proceedings. but acknowledging that meant admitting she'd given me reasons to do so. "You filed these," she said finally. "Did I? Why would I do that?" The conversation continued in circles while Lena gradually realized that I knew everything. About Jordan, about the secret bank account, about the lies she'd been maintaining for months. Each question I asked forced her to reveal more of the truth she'd been hiding. "How long have you known?" she asked finally. "About Jordan? About the money you've been transferring to his account? About the lies you've been telling Riley?" I kept my voice calm, factual. Long enough to document everything. Her face went white as she understood the implications. "Deshawn, please. We can work this out. I made mistakes, but we have a family. We can fix this." "Can we? Can you fix the fact that you've been stealing money to support your boyfriend? Can you fix the lies you've taught our daughter to tell?" The conversation that followed was painful but necessary. Lena admitted to the affair, claimed it was recent and meaningless, tried to minimize the financial improprieties as temporary loans rather than theft. But her explanations collapsed under the weight of evidence I'd gathered. The camera footage, bank records, and documented timeline made her attempts at damage control look like additional lies. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "I want Riley to be safe and secure. I want the lies to stop. And I want legal protection so this never happens again." That evening, after Riley was asleep, Lena called Jordan to tell him about the legal proceedings. I listened to her side of the conversation from the living room, hearing panic and recrimination replace the intimate tones I'd observed on camera. "They know everything," she said. "Bank records, video footage, all of it. You need to talk to a lawyer." Whatever Jordan's response was, it didn't provide the comfort Lena was seeking. When she hung up, she looked like someone who'd finally realized the full scope of what she'd lost. The next morning brought another phone call, this one from Jordan's employer, informing Lena that he'd been fired for falsifying timesheets and using company resources for personal activities. The house of lies was collapsing faster than either of them had anticipated, and I was watching it fall with the satisfaction of knowing that justice was finally being served. The Jefferson County Family Court occupied a brick building downtown that had witnessed decades of fractured families seeking resolution through legal proceedings. I arrived early, wearing my best suit and carrying a leather folder containing 2 years' worth of evidence that would determine Riley's future and mine. Ms. Morgan met me in the hallway, her professional confidence reassuring in an environment that felt designed to intimidate rather than comfort. "Everything ready?" I asked. "More than ready. Your documentation is some of the most comprehensive I've seen in 15 years of practice." Lena arrived with her attorney, a young man who looked overwhelmed by the scope of evidence he'd been asked to refute. She wore a conservative dress and minimal makeup, clearly attempting to project maternal respectability rather than the glamorous appearance she'd maintained for Jordan. Judge Patricia Williams presided with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every possible variation of marital betrayal and custody dispute. She reviewed the basic case information before addressing both legal teams. This case involves allegations of adultery, financial misconduct, and custody concerns involving a minor child. Mr. Carter, your attorney may present your case. Ms. Morgan rose with the confidence of someone holding winning cards. Your Honor, we have extensive documentation of the defendant's extramarital relationship and misuse of marital assets to support her paramour. She presented the evidence methodically, bank records showing unauthorized transfers, camera footage documenting Jordan's presence in our home, and timeline documentation proving the relationship's duration and financial scope. The courtroom was silent as the video played, showing Jordan moving through my house with obvious familiarity while Riley slept in her bedroom down the hall. When the footage reached clips of him interacting with my daughter, Judge Williams's expression grew notably more serious. Mrs. Carter, the court has reviewed evidence suggesting you've been conducting an extramarital relationship in the marital home while your husband was working and your child was present. How do you respond to these allegations? Lena's attorney requested a brief recess, during which I watched him attempt to prepare a defense for the indefensible. When court resumed, His strategy was predictable, but ultimately futile. Your Honor, my client acknowledges that she developed an inappropriate relationship during a difficult period in her marriage. However, she maintains that her primary concern has always been her daughter's welfare. Judge Williams interrupted. Counselor, the evidence shows systematic financial deception involving thousands of dollars in marital assets. How does that serve the child's welfare? The question hung in the air without a satisfactory answer. Lena's attorney shifted to damage control, requesting shared custody and arguing that the affair didn't necessarily impact her fitness as a mother. But Ms. Morgan was prepared for every argument. Your Honor, the defendant didn't simply have an affair. She created an elaborate deception that included coaching the child to keep secrets, using marital assets to support her paramour, and exposing the minor child to an inappropriate relationship without the father's knowledge or consent. The testimony continued for 3 hours, with witness statements from neighbors who'd observed Jordan's frequent presence at our house and bank officials who confirmed the unauthorized account access. Throughout the proceedings, I maintained the same calm demeanor that had served me during months of gathering evidence. I wasn't seeking revenge or dramatic confrontation. I was pursuing legal protection for Riley's future and my own. When Judge Williams finally rendered her decision, her words were unequivocal. The court finds clear evidence of marital misconduct involving both adultery and financial impropriety. The defendant's actions demonstrate a pattern of deception that undermines the stability and security the minor child requires. She awarded me primary physical custody of Riley, with supervised visitation for Lena pending completion of counseling requirements. The financial ruling was equally decisive: full accounting of marital assets, restitution for unauthorized transfers, and legal protection preventing further misconduct. Furthermore, Judge Williams continued, the court is concerned about the minor child's exposure to inappropriate adult relationships and the coaching to maintain secrets from her father. These factors will be considered in any future custody modifications. As we left the courthouse, Ms. Morgan's satisfaction was evident. Mr. Carter, that was one of the most clear-cut cases I've handled. Your evidence made their position completely untenable. I felt relief rather than triumph. The legal proceedings were finished, but the real work of rebuilding Riley's security and my own life was just beginning. That evening, I picked up Riley from her temporary stay with my sister and drove her home to a house that finally felt honest again. The lies were over, the deception exposed, and the truth had prevailed through careful documentation rather than dramatic confrontation. Ezra had been right. The man who acts in silence never loses the sound of victory. And the victory was sweeter because it had been earned through patience and preparation rather than anger and impulse. The house felt different when we returned that evening. Larger somehow, like removing Lena's deception had created physical space where lies had once crowded the rooms. Riley moved through the familiar environment with cautious curiosity, sensing change without fully understanding its implications. Daddy, is Mommy coming back tonight? No, sweetheart. Mommy's going to be living somewhere else for a while. Because of her friend? The question reminded me how much Riley had observed and internalized during months of adult deception. At 6 years old, she'd been forced to navigate competing loyalties and keep secrets that no child should carry. Because grown-ups sometimes make choices that mean families have to change, I said carefully. But you and Daddy are going to be just fine. That evening, I helped Riley reorganize her bedroom, letting her choose which toys and books should stay and which might be stored away. The activity gave her a sense of control during a transition she hadn't chosen, and it helped both of us process the reality of our new circumstances. Can I call Mommy tomorrow? We'll figure out when and how you can talk to her, but right now let's focus on getting settled in our house. After she was asleep, I walked through rooms that had been sites of elaborate performance for months. The living room where Jordan had sat drinking my beer. The kitchen where Lena had lied about cologne bottles and coffee mugs. The bedroom where she'd maintained a facade of marital devotion while planning rendezvous with another man. I stripped the bed and put fresh sheets on the mattress, then opened windows throughout the house to clear out lingering traces of deception. The physical actions felt symbolic, removing contamination and allowing honest air to circulate through our space. The next morning brought practical considerations that required immediate attention. Riley needed consistent childcare arrangements while I worked, school pickup and drop-off coordination, and emotional support during what would inevitably be a difficult adjustment period. My sister Carmen offered to help with transitions until I could arrange reliable long-term care. Mrs. Patterson next door volunteered to serve as backup for emergencies. The neighborhood network that had once seemed like casual friendliness revealed itself as genuine community support when it was needed most. "Daddy, are you sad about Mommy?" The question came during breakfast, delivered with the directness that children use when they need honest information to make sense of their world. "I'm sad that our family had to change," I said. "But I'm not sad that we're going to be truthful with each other from now on." "Mommy's friend wasn't supposed to be in our house?" "No, sweetheart, he wasn't." Riley nodded with the acceptance that children show when adult explanations finally align with their own observations. She'd known something was wrong before I did, but hadn't had the vocabulary or authority to address it directly. That afternoon, I received a call from Ms. Morgan updating me on financial recovery efforts. The court had ordered full restitution of transferred funds, and Jordan's accounts had been frozen pending collection proceedings. "Mr. Carter, we should recover most of the misappropriated assets within 30 days. The defendant's cooperation has been complete since the court ruling. The money mattered, but what mattered more was the legal precedent that would prevent future financial misconduct." Lena's access to marital assets was now permanently restricted, and any violation would result in immediate custody consequences. Wednesday brought Riley's first supervised visitation with her mother at a family services center downtown. I waited in the parking lot while they spent 2 hours in a room designed for awkward reunions and court-mandated reconciliations. When Riley emerged, she was quiet, but not distressed. The visit had been cordial but strange, like meeting someone familiar in an unfamiliar context. "How was it?" "Mommy cried a lot. She said she was sorry for making bad choices." "How did that make you feel?" "Confused, but also kind of relieved." That evening, I helped Riley write a letter to her mother, expressing her feelings about the changes in our family. The exercise gave her agency in a situation where most decisions had been made by adults, and it provided a constructive outlet for emotions she was still learning to process. "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" "We're going to be better than okay, sweetheart. We're going to be honest and safe and happy." As I tucked her into bed that night, Riley seemed more relaxed than she'd been in months. The tension of living in an environment built on lies had lifted, replaced by the security of knowing that what she observed aligned with what adults told her was true. The house was quiet after she fell asleep, but it was a peaceful quiet, rather than the ominous silence that had characterized recent months. Truth had a different sound than deception, and both Riley and I were learning to appreciate the difference. 3 months later, I was back behind the wheel of my rig, but everything about the experience had changed. Riley sat in the passenger seat, secured in a specialized safety harness that allowed her to ride with me on shorter regional routes that kept us close to home base. She loved the elevated view from the cab, pointing out landmarks and asking endless questions about the mechanics of 18-wheeler operation. Her curiosity reminded me why I'd fallen in love with trucking in the first place. The freedom of the road, the satisfaction of transporting goods that kept commerce flowing, the peace that came from honest work honestly done. "Daddy, what's that big building?" "That's a distribution center. They store goods there before shipping them to stores." "Like the toys in my room?" "Exactly like that." The custody arrangement had evolved to accommodate my work schedule while prioritizing Riley's stability. She spent most weekday nights with my sister Carmen, who lived close to her school, and weekends and short-haul trips with me. Longer routes were handled by other drivers until Riley was old enough to handle extended travel. The financial recovery had been complete. Every dollar that Lena had transferred to Jordan's account had been returned with court-ordered interest. More importantly, the legal protections were permanent. Any future attempts to access marital assets or interfere with custody arrangements would result in immediate sanctions. Lena's supervised visitations had gradually extended to unsupervised time as she completed court-mandated counseling and demonstrated appropriate boundaries. Riley looked forward to seeing her mother, but she was equally happy to return home to the honesty and stability we'd built together.
Daddy, remember when Mummy's friend used to come over? I remember. I'm glad that doesn't happen anymore. Me too, sweetheart. The conversation was matter-of-fact rather than emotional. Riley had processed the changes in our family with the resilience that children show when they're finally given truth instead of confusion. Jordan had disappeared entirely from our neighborhood after the court proceedings. Last I'd heard, he'd moved to another state and found employment in construction.
His role in our lives had ended as abruptly as his access to my house and my income. Sometimes, during the quiet hours of highway driving, I reflected on the lessons this experience had taught me. Ezra's wisdom about acting in silence rather than anger had been vindicated completely. The patient gathering of evidence had provided legal protection that no amount of confrontation could have achieved. More importantly, I'd learned that my daughter was more observant and resilient than I'd given her credit for. Her innocent questions had been attempts to make sense of adult deception, and when the deception ended, her confusion had been replaced by relief. Daddy, where are we going next? Wherever the load takes us, baby girl. And then home? Always home. The highway stretched ahead of us, carrying freight and possibilities toward destinations marked on dispatch sheets and GPS screens. But unlike my previous years of driving, I was no longer running from anything or toward uncertain futures. Riley and I were building something honest and permanent together, 1 mile at a time. The road had taught me patience, and patience had taught me that truth always prevails when it's properly documented and courageously defended. The sound of the engine hummed beneath us, diesel power converting to forward motion with mechanical precision. It was the sound of honest work, honest relationships, and honest futures being built through decisions made with integrity rather than deception. Behind us, the lies and betrayals grew smaller in the mirrors until they disappeared entirely. Ahead of us, the highway promised destinations we could reach together, carrying cargo that would be delivered on time and relationships that would be built on truth. That was enough. That was everything. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in Deshawn's place? Leave your comment, like this video, and don't forget to subscribe. And if you want another powerful story, click on the video appearing to your left.